Hello everyone and welcome to Let's Play with AK, featuring me, your host Akukami. In this StarCraft 2 episode, we'll be taking a look at a game I played on ladder. This is going to be a TvZ matchup on Metalopolis. Starting off in the 6 o'clock position is me spawning as the red Terran player. Meanwhile, my opponent Laminate has spawned in the 9 o'clock position as the blue Zerg player. I'm going to be casting this game a little bit differently, and I'm just going to tell you what happened in my opening, in actually both of our openings. I opened with 2-port Banshee, and while I was actually setting up shop here with my 2-star ports, while that was going on, I actually trapped my opponent's drone here, and I think, after reviewing the replay several times, I think he caught one of these 2 refineries. Realizing that he might actually go for a gas block, I decided to delay my orbital and put down a second refinery so he wouldn't block my second gas, as 2-port Banshee is required in order to pull this build off and go cloakless. Now, what happens here is that 90% of the time, if my opponent is not ready for Banshees, doesn't have any spore crawlers, or doesn't have any an overseer and enough queens to fend off my harass, what happens is my opponents will either call GG and leave the game, or leave the game actually. But the other 10% of the time, if they are ready for this, like my opponent is right here with an evolution chamber here and spore crawlers here to spot for my Banshees, one of 2 things happens. He's either ready for me with a mass wave of Zerglings, or a Ling Bling bust, which will take down this wall here, or, as you're going to see here, I do play through it and I managed to keep my opponent's economy and army in check, and that's where I'm going to pick up right now. Sending my 2 Banshees back home, we'll be using them to scout for any third expansions that my opponent will be coming out with, as I speed things up a little bit here. Was trying to build some Vikings in this location, but forgetting to lift off my 2-star ports, and so that I can go for tanks. And the reason why I'm going for tanks is because I simply want to protect my command center, keep it well protected from any kind of heavy aggression that my opponent may be coming with. Starting to build the supply depot wall here as I build my command center. Meanwhile, back in my opponent's base, he does have that Baneling's Nest and a Roach Warren up, and because I'm wary of this is why I want to go for tanks. I actually forget to put an engineering bay just in case my opponent was going Mutalisk, as I did see that he was going for his lair tech, and of course lair tech is signaling that he's probably planning to move into Mutalisk harass, but I'm just going to tell you that right now that he does not go for any kind of Mutalisk harass, and fortunately for me, even though he wasn't going for there, I did not have an engineering bay set up to build some turrets in case he did decide to go Mutalisk. So I caught a big break right there. Using the 2 Vikings that I was originally building to scout the area, pick off any stray overlords, while I used my Banshees to pick off any stray scouts, Zerglings, drones, and also to check for any kind of quick third base. As I set up shop here, killing off my opponent's scouting Zergling that was over here, walling off this location just in case my opponent decided to go for a Zergling run by, and setting up my siege tanks in front of my natural behind this supply depot wall. Anyways, just using my my air army just to harass and scout out for any third expansions as I set up shop here. Going to be going for Blue Flame Hellions actually after building some siege tanks, because my goal is to try and regain some kind of map control, ground map control anyways, as my opponent sends an overseer in this location, will be shot down by this missile turret, but actually manages to get off a changeling drop, but I do spot this and use my Hellion to kill that off. Meanwhile, my opponent has finished his Spire, and then, again, fortunately for me, decided not to go for Mutalisk. Also put down an infestation pit, and is also building a macro hatch in his base, as I do go for my 3rd base here in this location, but my opponent delays it a little bit as he's able to kill my SCV off with that scouting Zergling, and but I managed to kill it off with my Hellions as I am building, continue building. Putting out some missile turrets in this location because I was expecting some kind of mutalisk harass, and actually I will slow things down a little bit. My opponent went for his own expansion in this location, and I actually managed to catch this with my Vikings, and what I will be doing here is landing them in this location and start shooting it as I bring my Banshees around. When I spot this, I noticed that his hatchery is there. I bring my Banshees around, and as I land my Vikings, start shooting this hatchery down, as my opponent actually decided to make Corruptors, and probably to deal with my air harass. Realizing that my air harass is in this location, sent some Zerglings out to deal with the Vikings, but of course they can fly, switching them to air mode, as my Banshees shoot down his hatchery before his Corruptors get in this location. Actually, it manages to cancel it off before it finishes building, and I target fire one of the Corruptors, as I think both of my air harass is dead. Because these Corruptors do well against any air harass, but decides to pull out with his second Corruptor, as I will speed things back up again. If he engaged that, he probably would have would have been able to duke it out with my Viking and take it out, and take my Banshee out as it was nearby. Using my Hellions to regain map control and gain control of these Xel'Naga watchtowers, as I do have a second pair of Vikings. Actually, I'll slow things down a bit, as my opponent is going for a drop. Yes, my opponent goes for a drop in the back of my base, and I don't notice this until he starts actually attacking my base with the roaches and infestors that he brings along in his ventral sacks. Bringing his overlords. Managed to spot this with the Marine, but like I said, I wasn't paying attention to the mini-map and the alert, and it wasn't until he actually started coming in and attacking my base that I noticed that he had gone for a drop in my base. Fortunately for me, 3 Thors managed to pop out in time, as I send my my other Thor to come and help with this engagement. My opponent dropping lots of infested Terran, going to be doing a lot of damage in my base. However, I do manage to bring around the rest of my forces, bring out my Hellions, and as my opponent's infested Terran get shot down by my 4 Thors in this location, managing to drive back my opponent's aggression, taking out the rest of these roaches, who are now 0-1 in upgrades, as my Thors do not have any upgrades on them. Burrows these 2 infestors and leaves 1 roach here. Will be managing to kill that off. Just again going back here, scouting out if my opponent went for a third. Meanwhile, my opponent decides to move out with a second wave of aggression. This time it's a Ling Roach push. My 2 Hellions that were here managed to catch this and actually burn off a few Zerglings, but it's not enough. My opponent is coming in for an attack at the front of my natural, but I do have a siege tank here, as I do raise all my supply depot wall, deciding actually to bypass all of that and check if I have a third in here in this location. Actually, he knows I have a third in this location, and is going to be going for my planetary fortress, but I do manage to catch one of this and actually start doing some kind of mass repair in case my opponent decided to go straight for my planetary fortress. Decides not to, and instead picks off the missile turrets, picks off the supply depots, as moves in too close with his roaches, and will be coming in with some reinforcements, accidentally sending out my my Hellions before my siege tanks and Thors, and I will actually manage to clean this up. My Thor gets taken down, the siege tank will get taken down, but there's just too much in that location, as my opponent not deciding to go for any other drops at this time. I should have gone over here with my Viking in this location. If I did that, I would have gotten a lot, probably, well, not a lot, because these do have speed upgrades, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 overlord kills. Meanwhile, back at my opponent's base, continuing to macro ups, actually building a 3rd hatchery in that location to expand, as I am continuing to patrol the area with my Vikings, checking for any more stray overlords. Like I said, frustrating. I should have gone in that location. Trying to bring around more overlords with full of roaches, going actually to be trying to drop me in this location. However, passes by my Viking shortly, and will be shooting down one of the overlords as it comes they come by, and I will manage to hold this off as my opponent's Overlord is not able to drop its cargo as this missile turret will shoot it down. Using my Hellions to scout out for any kind of early third or fourth base. As I start moving my mech forces to the front of my opponent's natural, will be setting up shop here, as my opponent is getting ready for another roach drop, probably in the back of my base, as this drop gets shot down, like I said before. Moving the roaches to the front of his base. I don't know if he actually sees this right now. No, does not see this at the moment, as he sees that my Hellions are here to start to do damage in that location. As I do scan, and my tank starts attacking the front of his natural here. Actually, will actually try to drop his cargo onto my siege tanks, and in an attempt to do some splash damage to my own mech army. But my reinforcements come in here, as followed by my SCVs, who are here to help repair. We'll be putting down a missile turret in case there are any Mutalisks. I'm still wary of those Mutalisks, as my opponent decides to engage this with his roaches, who are now 1-1 in upgrades, as my mech army is 0-1 in upgrades. We'll be shooting down this evolution chamber, but my opponent decides to move in, but there are too many Thors here. Shoots down one Overlord that was holding its cargo, manages to actually drop in this location. Was a decent drop, but there's just too much mech in this in here, and he doesn't do enough splash damage, and manages to kill off two of my tanks here, actually. But there are Thors in this location, able to tank their damage and hold this off, as my opponent is not building any more forces, not engaging my mech with those roaches that were moved over there to deal with my Hellions. Speaking of which, I forget to bring my Hellions in this engagement, leaving them out in the party, but it does not matter because there are no more reinforcements. My opponent is not producing any more reinforcements. Actually decided to go for that Greater Spire, but it's too little too late, as my opponent calls GG, as he does not have any more forces to deal with my mech. In this game, I went for my 2-port Banshee air harass, but my opponent was ready for this with Spore Crawlers and a Queen to help defend against this, and as such, I was forced to bring back my Banshees and come up with a different plan of attack. Using a combination of air harass, my Banshees going for any scouts, while my Vikings went Overlord hunting, I was able to set up my expansion and managed to actually catch up with him in terms of economy. In the final engagement, my opponent actually decided to drop my tank line with roaches, but there was just too much mech here and too much Thor and tank fire that was able to deal with this roach drop. He actually did manage to take out a significant amount of my mech, but because my tanks were decently spread out, I was able to deal enough damage to his drop in order to continue pushing up into his natural, where I eventually won the game. Well, everyone, that does it for this game. If you liked my commentary and videos, please subscribe to my channel. Also, thumbs up and like this video. As always, thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you on another episode of Let's Play with AK.